We're on WBAI. It was a column by Peggy Noonan about the latest ascension of Senator Barack Obama from Illinois, who may or may not be. He will decide over the Christmas holiday in his annual trip to Hawaii to visit his family whether or not he will seek the Democratic presidential nomination for the year 2008. We await his decision. Shelton Walden here, Walden's Pond. Well, this past week, according to the latest reports, headline story, circumcision halves HIV risk, U.S. agency find. Circumcision appears to reduce a man's risk of contracting AIDS from heterosexual sex by half, U.S. government health officials said yesterday. And directors of the two largest funds fighting the disease said they would consider paying for circumcisions in high-risk countries. The announcement was made by officials of the National Institutes of Health as they halted 2 clinical trials in Kenya and Uganda on the grounds that not offering circumcision to all the men taking part would be unethical. The success of the trials confirmed a study done last year in South Africa. AIDS experts immediately hailed the finding. This is very exciting news, said Daniel Halperin, an HIV specialist at the Harvard Center for Population Development, who has argued that circumcision slows the spread of AIDS in the parts of Africa where it is common. In an interview from Zimbabwe, he added, quote, "I have no doubt that as word of this gets around, millions of African men will want to get circumcised, and that will save lives." So he says. Well, my guest on the line is someone who has been is an attorney who has litigated cases on the issue of circumcision in this country, male circumcision in particular, infant male circumcision, and he is very well familiar with the issue of genital mutilation. And I'm talking about, he's been here before on this program. I'm talking about David Llewellyn. David, are you there?
I am indeed.
How are you this afternoon?
I'm fine. You're reading, I think it was Peggy Noonan's column about lurching.
Yes.
This headline, science, I might call it, is yet another lurch in the circumcision debate, it seems to me.
Absolutely.
I think her general premise could apply to these headlines about studies that haven't even been published and subject to peer review yet.
That's right.
Exactly what everyone needs to know about this study. And in fact, it might interest your audience that the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases has online a question and answer session about these studies, and points out that it really doesn't. These studies really have very little implication for United States policy here in the United States, because the method of AIDS transmission here in the United States is assumed to be different than it is in Africa and the like, so that people should not rush out and immediately apply any of this, in my opinion, to any decision, let alone to any decision here in the United States.
Absolutely. Well, let's first of all, let me just let the audience know that David Llewellyn is an attorney in private practice and based in Atlanta. He has appeared on numerous radio and television shows around the country on this issue, has been here before on this program, and has represented people and parents trying to protect their children from, in this country, from routine infant circumcision, and of course, trying to protect children as well. And David, when I looked at this article, and of course, I've talked about this issue a lot on this program over the years. I said that this is a long line in a continuum of reasons that doctors and scientists and all sorts of people have claimed that circumcision could prevent various diseases going back now maybe 150 years.
Well, you're right. I mean, we started in the United States and in the English-speaking world in general. Circumcision became popular in the end of the late 19th century and early part of the 20th century as a way to reduce masturbation or eliminate masturbation, which was believed to cause all sorts of diseases. And bizarre claims were made for it, that hydrocephalus had been cured by circumcising an infant, which is, of course, absurdly unscientific, but that was published in a major medical journal. It's interesting. It was originally proposed really from 1880 right up into the 1950s to reduce sexuality and to reduce sexual sensitivity. This is something that's not commonly known. In fact, starting in the 1960s, when we started to talk openly a little bit about sex in this country, people started saying, well, it doesn't make any difference in regard to sensitivity, although the entire theory of circumcision, first to prevent masturbation and now to prevent AIDS, is that you remove the sexually sensitive tissue, which is the foreskin, that has mucosal lining, highly sensitive, and you replace that with the glands keratinizing, and thereby providing supposedly a barrier to the entry of HIV. But, of course, that desensitizes the penis. And, frankly, the science here does not make a whole lot of sense, although it may be that in the populations they have studied in Africa, there is some validity to the idea of circumcising a male, but it certainly needs to be emphasized. It is certainly not a cure-all. And I think the article that was in the New York Times and pretty much printed all over the world made this plain, that I think it was cited Dr. Mark Dubal, who's the executive director of President Bush's emergency plan for AIDS relief, as saying that prevention efforts must reinforce the ABC approach: abstain, be faithful, and correct and consistent use of condoms. That is the way to prevent AIDS. It has worked in Thailand, which did not find it necessary to institute circumcision to get their AIDS rate down to something reasonable. Circumcision certainly didn't work here in the United States to prevent millions of men from getting AIDS. In fact, the NIAID admits that on its website, the millions of circumcised men have become infected with HIV through heterosexual exposure to the virus. Men who receive adult male circumcision may perceive that they are at decreased risk for transmission and therefore may not maintain other risk reduction strategies. That would be, and unfortunately, that's what happens with headlines. People remember sound bites, they remember headlines. Mm-hmm. They say, gee, I'm now circumcised, I can't get AIDS, you're safe. And both the man and his partners end up with HIV, which is a real tragedy.
So what do you think? I mean, this study, by the way, has a lot of heft behind it because, in part, it's being funded by Bill Gates and his, and I guess in conjunction with I don't know about President Clinton's foundation as well, and this has been something that I've read over the years that a number of these scientists have been looking very, if we will, lustfully towards Africa to see if they could do these kind of studies.
Well, it's interesting. If this study, as well as the study that was cited last year, the Albert study from France, these two studies and that one were stopped early, supposedly because it would be unethical to continue them because of the difference in HIV transmission. Now, folks ought to know that, for example, in the Kenya study that was just done, the difference, well, they had 1,393 men who were circumcised and 1,393 who were circumcised and 1,393 who remained intact. The difference after a year, as I understand it, was that 22 of the circumcised men got HIV and 47 of the intact men got HIV. Now, that sounds, you can take that and say, wow, 50% difference of rate, isn't that something? But you're forgetting about the 22 men who got it anyway. And another thing people need to realize, when you're circumcised as an adult, you are going to be out of commission sexually for a considerable period of time, 4 to 6 weeks at least. Mm-hmm. And I understand that the men were told in a little handbook that sexual intercourse can be started after 4 to 6 weeks. But it's best to use a condom as this helps to protect the newly healed wound. It is always wise to use a condom if there's any risk of HIV infection. I would say it isn't wise, it's absolutely essential. Mm-hmm. But then it goes on, this is particularly important after circumcision as the newly healed wound may be a weak point for 2 or 3 months. Now, if these men didn't have sexual intercourse in a year's period for 4 to 6 weeks out of that period, and then when they did, for another 2 months or so, always used a condom, then, of course, their rate of acquisition of HIV is going to be lower. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the sort of thing that somebody who the peer review process weeds out. We don't know if these studies, because they have not been reviewed and published in a peer-reviewed journal, we don't know if these studies are accurate or not. Even if they are, the real cure for AIDS prevention is faithfulness, abstinence, if you can, if you aren't in a long-term faithful relationship, and the use of a condom. It is not expensive surgery. That's another interesting thing about these studies. The surgeries took 25 to 30 minutes. They had to be done in operating rooms. Even given the disparity in income between American doctors and African doctors, that's a long time. And if you start adding, and a lot of money, if you start adding that up, it does not seem to be a particularly effective way and cost-effective way to go about reducing an epidemic. It would be far better to hand out boxes of condoms by the gross, something that apparently the American government now refuses to do, but which certainly makes a whole lot of sense.
Let me also say here that there was some really Daniel Halperin, who was the HIV specialist at the Harvard Center for Population Development, who had been one of the people behind this study. He says here in the article, which he gave some really interesting reasons why he thinks this is effective. He said, quote, private practitioners also do it. He said, quote, in some places it's $20, in others much more. Lots of the wealthy elite have already done it. It prevents STDs. It's seen as cleaner. Sex is better. Women like it. I predict that a lot of men who can't afford private clinics will start clamoring for it, unquote. What do you think about that?
Well, these are the same reasons that have been given for routine infant circumcision in this country. Most of them are either questionable or not true. Preventing STDs. Now, there was a recent study that came out of New Zealand, that purported to show a reduction in STDs if you were circumcised. Highly criticized. That study's been highly criticized for a couple of reasons. It was based on self-reporting of circumcision status as well as self-reporting, and that's notoriously inaccurate, believe it or not. And it was also based on self-reporting of STDs, which is, of course, ridiculous. All right? The authors essentially backed off of that study once it was criticized. But a lot of people who are invested in their own status, and I don't know the status of anyone who did these studies, but one can determine, I think, from the glowing things attributed to circumcision, the status of someone. And we all have a status. We all have some prejudice because of our own circumcision status, I expect. But to say that we should circumcise men because sex is better, something that hasn't been shown at all, and frankly is sort of intuitively ridiculous, because if you're cutting off a large amount of sexually functioning tissue, and we know that the foreskin has most of the fine touch nerve receptors in the penis in it, if you cut that off, it would seem that would actually debilitate you sexually, which was the reason we started doing infant circumcision in the United States. That's very clear. This thing that women like it is entirely subjective. Now, and the elite do it. Well, if you say it's cleaner, it's better, rich people do it, and women love it, that certainly is a way of inducing people to say, gee, I want it now. And then they may find out that they'll be very unhappy about it. One of the things I've discovered, and I've been doing circumcision-related cases now for some 10 years, there are a lot more complications with circumcision, both adult and infant, than people realize. I am confronted all the time by parents whose children have been damaged, or by adults who themselves have been seriously damaged in circumcision, who say, but if I had only known of this risk, I would never have permitted it. And this applies not only to hospital circumcisions, but also to Judaic ritual circumcisions. I'm representing a boy right now who was seriously damaged, had part of his glands removed in a circumcision by a loyal who claimed to be certified. I'm getting ready to file another suit for another boy who likewise lost a portion of his glands. The medical literature deals with this, but parents are not warned that these things can happen. A lot of people, when they find out the truth, and there's certainly websites where you can go. I'll put in a little plug for one of them, I think. It's filled with medical articles. It's www.cirp.org. On the web, it's filled with medical articles that will show you the damage and the like that can be done and the risk that one runs. But there's more than just risk. There's also loss of sexual sensitivity, which was the original object of circumcision. Some interesting things I found out over the years. There's an article very few people have ever known about, apparently. It was in a journal called Venerology, dealing, I guess, with all things sexual. It came out of the University of Sydney, and they were looking at were condom sizes right. And in their sample, and these were mostly Caucasian men in Australia, they found, the article says, there was a significant difference in length, with the uncircumcised men having a mean length 8 millimeters greater than the circumcised. Insufficient residual foreskin in some circumcised men may have tethered their erections. In other words, and indeed, I have had men approach me about suing over their circumcisions because so much shaft skin was taken off that they were tethered and tight and thought that, they'd been damaged. Indeed, they had been. And I think that's a very common injury that men don't appreciate.
And don't want to talk about either.
Absolutely. Most human beings do not want to discuss sex frankly, and I don't care whether that's here in the United States or elsewhere. Another thing about these studies that all seem to come out of Africa. There may be, it's very hard to say, but certainly they may in the end be viewed as sort of neo-colonialism. This has been suggested by, not just certainly by me, but by others who have been discussing this issue on the internet. Because this is sexual and because of the unfortunate problems between human beings on the basis of race, this circumcision has actually been suggested in the past to lessen black sexuality, for example. Here in this country, and very few people know this, but it's true, in the late 19th century, there was a doctor named Raymond Dino who was in San Diego, and he was very influential, and he was a big proponent of circumcision. He thought it cured everything, essentially, including what he called the Negro rape crisis. And I think most of your listeners are very familiar with the very tragic problem that we had all throughout this country for 60, 70 years after the Civil War, of black men constantly being accused of raping white women. And Dr. Raymond Dino recommended in his magazine that he published called the National Popular Review, that was quite influential in medicine in its day, that all black men be circumcised to keep them from raping white women. Now, this is ridiculous, and I'm certainly not suggesting that the African researchers are suggesting that, but I think certainly it can be viewed, since all these studies seem to be done in Africa, that there is a little bit of a neo-colonial attitude or an attitude of unfortunate superiority, that doctors, everyone runs to Africa to prove something. And I think that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, they test out their theories, their medical theories about different things.
Well, exactly. And the other thing that's interesting about Africa, I mean, this whole idea of circumcision preventing HIV was first floated in the 1980s as a theory, without anything really to back it up, a hunch, as it were. And it's ignored a number of interesting facts. It's ignored the fact that we have, in the United States, one of the highest rates of circumcision in the industrialized world, probably the highest outside the state of Israel. And yet we have one of the highest rates of HIV infection, whereas in Sweden and Finland and the like, where they don't circumcise at all, except for religious reasons, the rate is much lower than it is here. They've ignored the fact that, for example, in Ethiopia, there's a very high rate of circumcision. In fact, it's almost universal, even among the Coptic Christians there. And yet there's a very high rate of HIV. At the same time, if you look at Cuba, circumcision is essentially unknown, and HIV at the same time is very rare. Whereas in Lesotho, circumcision is real common, but HIV is very high. So you have to be very, very careful when you look at studies and look at headlines in drawing conclusions. And what's interested me this week is that a lot of discussion groups on the internet, MSN.com, had a whole discussion on this issue. And people are beginning to understand that headlines are headlines. They aren't necessarily the truth, and a lot of folks on there were pointing out some of the things I've just pointed out.
We're on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York, and good afternoon to all of you. My name is Shelton Walden. This is Walden's Pond, the weekly radio program on health, culture, and politics. A very privileged to be talking with David Llewellyn, an attorney in private practice in Atlanta, who, among his subjects he practices law on represents victims of circumcision here in the U.S. And we'll be taking some of your phone calls for David at 212-209-2900, 212-209-2900. I actually, as I'm listening to you speak about this issue, it just, of course, occurs to me that this is one body part that seems to be singled out for removal. And, when it comes to other cases, when it comes to different diseases, the body parts are not singled out for immediate removal. It just seems kind of odd that we constantly single this particular part for attention.
Well, I think the major problem in this regard is that that this operation involves the penis. And having done a good bit of study of the whole issue, not just of male circumcision, but also female genital modification or mutilation over the years, I think the one thing that is common to all human beings is that whenever a genital cutting or modification, there's some stretchings and other things that go on in different societies, whenever that becomes established, because the sexual organs are so central to the way we look at ourselves as persons. Once any sort of genital modification gets established in a society, it is very, very hard to convince people that it is not the right thing to do. I mean, you were genitally modified when you were an infant. It must be good. How could it be bad? Your parents who loved you did it to you. This is a loving thing. I know Soraya Murray, who is from Somalia and was subjected to pharaonic circumcision, the most severe type, when she was a young girl. Has spoken several times, and I've heard her. I know her. She's a wonderful lady. And she says, her mother told her she was going to be given a gift. Father was opposed to genital mutilation, but her mother thought it was necessary. After all, she'd been done. This is the way all women were done. And so when she took her, she told her she was going to be given her gift. This is a common excuse made for female genital modification and mutilation. Mm-hmm. And of course, it was not a gift. It was horrible. In fact, that brings up something else that's interesting, is that there was actually a study that was presented at the Rio de Janeiro International AIDS Society Conference in 2005, called Female Circumcision and HIV Infection in Tanzania, for better or for worse. And that study found that circumcising women actually lowered HIV infection. Now, I think if one were to propose today that we circumcise in any fashion women to reduce the transmission of the AIDS virus, they would be hounded.
Well, we have
crackpots.
Well, first of all, we have a law in this country,
right,
that protects women from that procedure. Of course, there was a case down in your area recently regarding that issue.
Right, the Autumn case was very sad.
Yeah, this immigrant man he circumcised his daughter here.
Right, he was, as I recall, he was from Ethiopia, where this is common. The wife was from South Africa. She was part Zulu and part Dutch. Neither ethnic group circumcises either men or women. And it was interesting in that case, a lot of people questioned, how could the mother not know? Well, the clitoris is very small in a baby, and apparently this custom is so ingrained that there are special powders that are used to immediately cauterize the wound. And the father apparently, according as I understand the testimony in court, there was a week period when he alone took care of the child. And so, I believe that distinctly can happen without anyone's really knowing for a long time. We know that, believe it or not, Blue Cross Blue Shield in this country, as I understand it, at least some of the Blue Cross Blue Shield organizations, until 1977, paid for clitoridectomies that were prescribed by physicians.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Patricia Robinette, who has written a book, she is a psychotherapist out on the West Coast. She's written a book about her experiences. She apparently was clitoridectomized sometime around the age of 5 or 6. She's actually blocked it out of her memory, but it's clear that it was done to her. This was not. There were people there were doctors in the 1950s proposing the removal of the clitoral prepuce, the clitoral foreskin, to make women better sexually, to prevent the accumulation of smegma under the clitoral foreskin and the like. So we certainly had an amount of female genital mutilation in this country, even by doctors with degrees from the best universities in this country.
It would be nice if the insurance companies would stop paying for infant male circumcision around here one of these days.
It's amazing to me that Medicaid in many states and most health insurers pay for infant male circumcision when there is no compelling medical reason at all. There are only possible benefits that are unproven, and those certainly can't be weighed. They certainly don't outweigh, in the mind anyway, of all the medical associations, the risks involved, and in my mind, they don't outweigh the damage that's actually done.
Well, a lot of people say, look, I mean, one of the reasons why this hasn't moved forward because there's a lot of religious considerations involved here, and I think that because we had a case here last year regarding the Orthodox community, and there was some deaths there was some injuries and deaths by herpes infection because of some of the practices, and they were allowed to by government officials and public health officials to continue the practice under their auspices and not to fall under the public health rules. So it's a very delicate issue here.
It is indeed, and I think that it goes when you add on to the general human reaction of I must be okay because it was done to me and it's been done for a long time in my family. When you add that and add the religious reason onto it, it becomes even more difficult to convince people that it's not a good thing. I think that there are those in all religions who generally practice circumcision who actually oppose it. Particularly these days, I know of many people who are Jewish who actively oppose circumcision. I've actually had parents consult with me about sometimes there's a dispute between the parents, both of whom are say Jewish, and one wants to circumcise and one doesn't, so it's controversial even there. And there are even those Muslims who don't believe it's required either because it's not mentioned in the Quran. It's only mentioned in the Hadith and Sunnah. So that's another whole issue. The real issue here is: do we adopt male circumcision for adults as a strategy for ending this horrible affliction of AIDS? And of course, I have no problem if a male wants to go out and have himself circumcised, and he's an adult. That's fine. But I think we should be very cautious about recommending a course of action that will give people a false sense of security and hope.
Yes.
Even telling somebody that condoms are safe, and effective. That's true, but there's still going to be a percentage of condoms that fail. And you have to, that's why really the only way to prevent any sexually transmitted disease is abstinence. It's not that I'm here pushing abstinence, but that just happens to be the fact.
Let's take a brief break here. We're going to come back with David Llewellyn, an attorney specializes in circumcision cases. My guest here on Walden's Pond this afternoon here on WBAI 99.5 FM. We'll be taking some of your phone calls at 212-209-2900, 212-209-2900 here on this edition of Walden's Pond on this December 17th, 2006. Stay with us. WBAI New York, it's 1:36 on this December 17th, 2006. Shelton Walden here, your host and producer. My guest this afternoon is David Llewellyn, attorney in private practice in Atlanta. He specializes in circumcision cases in this country and has been in the courtroom litigating on many occasions. We're talking about the issue of circumcision, particularly this the recent headlines that appeared last week in all the papers, wire service, etc., concerning a study coming out of Africa that says that circumcision cuts in half the HIV risk, according to the National Institutes of Health in 2 clinical trials in Kenya and Uganda. According to, it has an interesting name, Dr. Kevin M. DeCock, Director of HIV/AIDS for the World Health Organization. He says circumcision, quote, is not a magic bullet, but a potentially important intervention. And I think these studies have been targeted in Africa to find out if HIV can be reduced with this procedure. A lot of people are questioning this whole study. Has been peer reviewed? Is it right? Is it ethical? Is it a moral thing to do? And we're talking with David Llewellyn on the telephone. We're taking some of your phone calls at 212-209-2900, 212-209-2900. Coming up at 2 o'clock will be the Barrio Block. Great music coming your way at 2. And we're going to take calls now. When you call, turn off your radio and like to know where you're calling from. And questions for our guests, please, only. Thank you. Let's go to this line here for David Llewellyn and WBAI. You're on air. Hello?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Walton, and to your guest.
Yes, questions, please.
Yeah, my question to the lawyer is the Meissner corpuscles, the nerve ends at the penis. These are natural. My question to him, aren't these natural tentacles that fill and they're like an extension of the body and offer protection naturally like a condom?
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm not a biologist or a physiologist. But what I do understand is there are Meissner's corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles and the like. And what some of them feel, I think the Meissner's are fine touch, Pacinian or stretch. I could be wrong, could be one or the other. But these are specialized nerve endings, and they're found in abundance in what's called the ridged band of the foreskin. They have nothing to do with the immune system. What you may be thinking of is Langerhans cells, which are in abundance in the skin in general in human beings. One of the theories, it's interesting, because there have been a lot of proponents of circumcision over the years in the United States. So I remember one proponent of circumcision said, well, it's the lack of Langerhans cells. We've taken a look at infants' foreskins. They don't have any Langerhans cells, so it must be the lack of them that causes HIV to invade the body. Well, then they turn around and say, oh, no, wait a minute. Now we found out there are lots of them in the adult foreskin, so it must be that they trap the HIV virus and then distribute it throughout the body, because apparently Langerhans cells scoop up viruses and bacteria and so that they can then be destroyed by the white cells. That's sort of my rough understanding, because I certainly don't understand the whole immunological process. Having said that, there are Langerhans cells throughout the body. I don't know the distribution of them on the glands. I guess the theory of circumcision is if we remove the foreskin that on the inner lining is mucosa, and therefore it's not the same as epidermis. Epidermis is not as thick, and these Langerhans cells that would scoop up the HIV virus are removed will reduce the transmission. Now, that is possible that is true. But you then have to balance that against, one, the risk of infection from a circumcision, infant or adult, the loss of sensitivity, because you are going to lose most of the Meissner's corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles in the penis when the foreskin is removed. Therefore, I think intuitively, sensitivity has to be reduced. You will sometimes hear men say, no, after I was circumcised and adult, sensitivity increased. That could be for a couple of reasons. One, their foreskins may not have been able to come back. That's a reason sometimes used for adult circumcision. And then the exposure of the glands would, during sexual intercourse, probably resulting in greater feeling. In addition, we know that in the circumcision wound there are traumatic neuromas sometimes formed, where the nerves try and regrow, and that can be either painful or exquisitely sensitive. So it may be that some men do feel a greater sensitivity after circumcision, but I have known a number of men who have felt that their circumcisions actually reduced their sensitivity, and who found as they got into their 40s that they were getting almost numb.
Okay. All right. Thank you. 212-209-2900, and You're on the air with David Llewellyn, Walden Spot. Hello. Yes.
Hello, Shelton. Thank you for talking about this issue for so long. I appreciate it. My question is, legally and culturally, doesn't it fall under the Equal Protection Clause, considering the female circumcision is rightly outlawed and male circumcision isn't? And also, culturally speaking, this seems to be something that a lot of people joke about and make light of, and also something even like male rape is something people joke about and make light of compared to when it happens to women. I think there's like a cultural disconnect, which is the reason why it exists today still. I mean, like Shelton said, people don't want to really talk about it, and if you do talk about it, you're weird or something.
Well, I think you certainly point out something that's really true. Why do people laugh about circumcision or about male rape or something else? I think one reason is it makes us nervous. All right? Particularly if you were done. I don't mind saying that when this study came out, one of my partners came in with glee. It was the first thing I was met with. I already knew about it because of the Internet. He didn't know I knew, and he handed me the New York Times and said, "Look!" Another partner said, "Boy, your practice is ruined." I said, "Well," I said, "that's nice." I said, I think that we have a long way to go before my opinion is changed in any regard, in regard to whether or not one ought to go out and circumcise an infant or circumcise oneself to reduce the incidence. Remember, it's not preventing anything. It's merely reducing the incidence or making it a longer time before you get AIDS. And that's one thing that people need to remember.
I agree with you, because the logic is almost like, remove your teeth when you're a baby so you don't have to suffer a root canal when you're an adult.
Well, yeah, I think there are a lot of, it would be sort of like taking out an infant's teeth so that they don't have to worry about it. I'll say in regard to, let's see, your other question was, on equal protection. This issue has been raised. Zenas Baer who's a lawyer up in Minnesota, brought a lawsuit about this. I met with a very hostile court and didn't get any place. I think the court finally decided that the people who brought the case didn't have any standing. But I think it brings up something that's very interesting. If little girls and women below the age of 18 are protected from essentially all genital surgery and the genital modifications, why aren't little boys? I think it's something that you need to take up with your state legislature and the like to deal with. Now, at the same time, of course, because female genital modification, law follows society. We don't do female genital modification in English-speaking America, but we have done circumcision for a long time. A significant portion of the population has done it for religious reasons for thousands of years, and that makes it harder to convince somebody to outlaw it. And it also, I think, makes it harder for people to admit that it actually does reduce sensitivity and the like. Interestingly enough, the great Jewish sage Maimonides in the Middle Ages recognized that it reduced sexual sensitivity, but felt that it was necessary religiously because God commanded it, and it would make men more chaste and more likely to study the Torah. That's sort of, I think, in essence, what Maimonides said. Should we in this country protect everybody? I think that's an issue that lends itself to healthy debate in the legislature.
All right. Thank you always for your call. Let's move on here. Try this line. We got a lot of calls. WBAI, you're on the air. Okay. 212-209-2900. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello.
Hi, hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, hello. Okay, my name is Henry. I'm calling from the New England area. I'm not that far from Boston.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Are you on the internet?
No internet. No, I'm listening on a Sanjian shortwave.
Oh, okay, excellent. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Here I have a question. I was taught, too, that circumcision was a Jewish practice. And as a matter of fact, there's a nationalist political party in Norway that's proposing that if they get elected, they're going to do something to outlaw it. But I know most teenagers, most guys are circumcised. I know there was one that called up even on the show who wasn't, and he wanted to be because everybody else was. My question is this, though. I know about the HIV, and that's a rumor or that's a lie. But what I was taught, though, and what I found some people say, though, from research is that if you're not circumcised, there's a problem with cleanliness with the foreskin, either with urine or keeping yourself more clean or something, that if you were circumcised, either you wouldn't have to clean as much or some factor there, with bacteria or something.
All right, let me respond. Thank you. Thank you for your call.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. I would say this, that there is no doubt that underneath the foreskin of a number of men, not necessarily all of them, a substance will collect if you don't pull back your foreskin and rinse called smegma, which means soap in Greek. It is cast-off cells with some cellular exudate. It actually has been found by Indian researchers, who are about the only ones who've studied this, to have antiviral properties. It is generally harmless. It really does not consist of urine. It can be made up of the secretions from the prostate gland and the like. It is easily rinsed away. We have abundant soap and water in this country, and it is not a problem in the infants. The foreskin is not a problem in infancy. Basically, the rule with an infant foreskin is to leave it alone. Once you hit puberty, just like you wash under your armpits, you pull your foreskin back and rinse. Women generally rinse in their vulval area. In fact, they often pull back the clitoral foreskin and rinse underneath it. So it really is not an issue. Circumcised men, if they're loosely circumcised, can accumulate smegma underneath in the sort of the groove, the coronal sulcus. So I think that's really a non-issue and not any real reason to circumcise at all.
Okay. Listen, thank you for your call. 212-209-2900 and WBAI, you're on the hello.
Hey.
Hi.
Want to make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, hey, Sheldon. This is Howard from Manhattan. It's a really interesting show. There seems to be a whole history in Western science, and I was wondering if it's true in other cultures to remove parts of the body. I recall reading this article in the New York Times where doctors suggested mastectomies to prevent breast cancer in women who had a history of it, and tying everything to genetics. And
well, there's people who've done that. There's a TV reporter on Channel 7 who had that done.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that if you're an adult and you want to do it. But if somebody proposed every girl whose mother or grandmother had breast cancer at birth will remove that child's mammary material so she can't grow breasts, I think people would find that outrageous.
Do you find this in other cultures, or is this primarily a Western thing where we cut things out of the body, like our tonsils? There was a whole rage in the 60s to remove the tonsils of little children.
Sure. I lost mine.
Yeah, no, me too.
And now I get every virus that comes down the pike.
Hysterectomy.
I think that Western medicine, because for so long, remember before essentially 1940, surgery was the only option. There weren't antibiotics. The drugs that they had were not terribly effective. The body either healed itself or else you died or you lost the limb or whatnot. So that surgery was seen as a cure for all sorts of things. And I think that was true throughout Western medicine. And I think there's probably some residual of that in seeing a surgical solution to everything. Now, certainly there are times when surgery is important, vital. But generally it's not to deal with a normal body part. I mean, foreskin's normal. Babies are born with it. They've been born with it as far as we know, as long as human beings have been on this earth. It's not an abnormal part of the body. It's not something you just remove. Likewise, women are born with breasts. I mean, they're important. Without modern formulas, children used to die if they didn't get breast milk. We don't know the cause of breast cancer either. Some may be genetic, some may be chemical. It may be a virus. Really, we don't know. Right. Certainly, you wouldn't go doing this to all little girls, and likewise, I don't think you cut off foreskins when foreskin problems can be handled. Sometimes surgery is necessary to handle foreskin problems, frankly, not very often, now that we have good steroidal creams.
All right, thank you for your call. Let's try this line. WBAI, you're on there. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, hi.
Yes, you got to turn off your radio, please.
It's down. It's off.
Okay, go ahead, please, quickly.
Okay, can I lurch backward and talk about Senator Obama?
No, we're not talking about that right now.
Okay, fine.
WBAI, you're on there. Hello?
No, we're not talking about that right now. Fine.
Hello?
WBAI, hello?
WBAI, you're on there. Hello? 212-209-2900. WBAI, you're on there. Hello? Hello?
Hi, Hi.
Hi.
I'm glad that he said something about some vague medical theory behind this because...
Who's this calling?
Oh, this is Vajra.
How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good.
Because it sounds like magical thinking to me. and also another way to be extraordinarily mean to African people, but...
this is like the magic nail in the soup pot that somebody just wrote about?
I don't know. It sounds like magical thinking because what could be the theory behind this? And it's sort of like, don't we already know how to avoid this virus? It makes no sense.
Well, you got no argument from me.
I don't understand what the medical theory behind it could possibly be. I mean, okay, so there's some mucous membrane there. Well, what about us women? What are we supposed to do about the fact that we have a lot of mucous membrane being exposed here?
So you're right. Some of these arguments don't seem to make a lot of sense. We know, as far as I know, the HIV virus, if you are infected with HIV, is present in the semen and in your blood. And that yet there are those who are now contending that circumcision will reduce the incidence of HIV in women. In other words, if a man has HIV, he will be less likely to pass it to a woman. That seems to me to be distinctly unscientific and illogical. I wouldn't think any woman would want to take a chance in that regard.
No, and it makes absolutely no sense, and it is not an improvement. It's not an improvement on a woman's pleasure either.
Sure, I think there have been not many studies of these, but there was a study published in the British Journal of Urology that showed that women that had sexual experience. Extensive sexual experience with both circumcised and uncircumcised men preferred intact men. That would, I think, make logical sense because all men are born with foreskins.
Yeah, right. It serves a purpose. It's there for a reason.
That's right.
It really sounds like magical thinking more than anything else.
It's interesting that you mentioned this because somebody wrote on the internet a discussion group about the magical nail.
Uh-huh.
He says, I'll make you a soup with this nail, and he puts it in a pot. He says, oh, by the way, give me some cabbage, some onions, some ham. He says,
right.
They have the best soup we've ever had. Darn, best soup we've ever had? Okay. And then he sells the nail to him for a lot of money.
Right, all just one nail. Astonishing.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye. All right. David, we're almost out of time here. I'm sure this topic, this particular study, will get a lot more attention in the weeks and months to come.
Well, Shelton, it does seem to me that one thing I would leave everybody with. It is the height of arrogance of the West to say that Africans cannot be taught abstinence, faithfulness, and condom use. If our young people can be taught that, African nations can be taught that. And the money that they want to spend on circumcising Africa would be a lot better spent establishing schools, training teachers, and then having your course in sexuality, something we don't even like to have in this country,
right,
that gives African young people the facts. And we, as a country of the Enlightenment, those of us who believe in the European Enlightenment from the 18th century believe that the light shed upon the darkness always dispels the darkness, dispels the ghost, dispels superstition, and enlightens man to reach the correct decision. And all human beings are capable of this. And the problem you have in any poor area, and certainly the areas that we're dealing with in Africa where they're doing these studies, are poor. Mm-hmm. The problem that you have is that folks don't have good schools. If their schools, they got to pay for uniforms, they don't have the money to pay for them. The countries are so poor that the people have no education. And a situation that frankly existed, and it still exists in some pockets in this country, but it certainly existed when I was a little boy in this country. Lyndon Johnson and Kennedy and Johnson went through Appalachia looking at how poor
That's
folks
right. That's right.
What was the key? Education, economic development. You do those things, then you're going to eliminate this horrible problem.
That's right.
You aren't going to do it by circumcising everybody and having everybody believe they're safe.
That's right. David, it's always enlightening talking with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be on your show. You have such interesting folks who call in and enlightened listeners, I think is the way I see it.
Well, I thank you, and I thank you always for being there, talking about these issues and fighting the good fight on a very, very serious public health and a very human issue.
Well, I am grateful for a radio network that will allow you to discuss this issue because it is so controversial. We really don't discuss it openly in this country in a public forum, and it needs to be.
All right. David Llewellyn, I want to thank you again for being here on Walden's Pond, and have a great holiday season.
Thank you. You too, Sheldon.
Thank you. David Llewellyn, attorney in private practice in the city of Atlanta. Been litigating cases on circumcision for many years. Well-known speaker and litigator on these issues. David Llewellyn was my guest here on this edition of Walden's Pond for this December 17, 2006. Shelton Walden here, Walden's Pond. We're here every Sunday, 1 to 2 o'clock. We discuss health, culture, and politics, and so much more. Call us at 212-209-2984 off the air, 212-209-2984 off the air. Emails at swalden@wbai.org, swalden@wbai.org. God willing, we'll be back with you next Sunday, Christmas Eve, with another edition of Walden's Pond. Stay tuned for the Barrio Block coming up next at 2 o'clock. Peace.